The rain hammered down on the streets of Brooklyn with relentless fury, turning the sidewalks into rivers of grime and forgotten dreams. Patricia huddled beneath a cardboard overhang behind a Chinese restaurant on Mott Street, her thin jacket doing little to shield her from the October cold that seeped into her bones. At 32, she looked a decade older. The streets had a way of aging people faster than time itself. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around her face, and her once bright green eyes had dulled to the color of seawater on an overcast day. She hadn't always been here. 2 years ago, she'd had an apartment in Queens, a job as a paralegal, and a fiancé who promised her the world. Then came the opioid prescription after her car accident, the addiction that followed, the job loss, the eviction, and finally, David's departure. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter of their nearly empty apartment. "I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore." She'd read it twice before crumpling it up, and by then, she'd already sold everything worth selling. The sound of expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against wet pavement made Patricia look up. A man stood before her, impossibly out of place in this grimy alley. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she used to make in 3 months, and his salt and pepper hair was styled with precision despite the rain. His face was angular and hard, with dark eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. He couldn't have been older than 45, but he carried himself with the authority of someone who'd commanded respect for far longer. "For you look like you could use a meal," the man said, his voice smooth and deliberate, with the faintest trace of an old Brooklyn accent he'd probably spent years trying to polish away. Patricia had learned to be wary of men with expensive suits and ulterior motives. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," she said, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. A slight smile crossed the man's face. "I'm not selling anything. I'm Marco Salvatore, and I have a proposition that might interest you." He crouched down to her level, seemingly unbothered by the rain soaking through his suit. "I need someone to accompany me to a wedding tomorrow evening, someone who can play a role convincingly. In exchange, I'll pay you $5,000, get you cleaned up, and provide you with a place to stay for the next week." Patricia studied his face for signs of the usual predatory interest she'd encountered on the streets, but his expression remained businesslike. "Why me? Why not hire an escort or an actress?" "Because you have something they don't," Marco replied. "You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. That makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability is exactly what I need." He stood up and pulled out a business card, placing it on the dry spot beneath her makeshift shelter. "The wedding is for my business rival, William Chen. He's marrying a woman named Catherine Monroe tomorrow at the Plaza Hotel. I want to make an entrance, and I need someone on my arm who won't be recognized by anyone there." "What's the catch?" Patricia asked, eyeing the card but not reaching for it. "The catch is that you'll be entering a world you don't understand, surrounded by people who are dangerous in ways you can't imagine. But for one evening, you'll eat better than you have in years, wear clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and walk away with enough money to start over somewhere new." Marco turned to leave, then paused. "The card has the address of a hotel in Midtown. If you're interested, be there by 10 tomorrow morning. Ask for suite 2847. If you don't show up, I'll find someone else, and you'll go back to wondering where your next meal is coming from." Patricia watched him disappear into the rain, his figure quickly swallowed by the storm. She picked up the business card, feeling the expensive card stock between her fingers. It was simple, just a name, Marco Salvatore, and a phone number. No company, no title, no explanation. She knew the name, though. Everyone in certain circles of Brooklyn knew the Salvatore family. They'd been part of the city's underworld since the days of Prohibition, evolving from bootleggers to sophisticated racketeers who kept their hands clean while others did the dirty work. The question wasn't whether she should trust him. She knew better than that. The question was whether $5,000 and a week of safety was worth stepping into whatever game Marco Salvatore was playing. Patricia looked around at the alley that had become her home, at the dumpster she'd been eating from, at the sleeping bag that smelled of mildew and defeat. She thought about the winter that was coming, about how last year she'd nearly frozen to death during a January cold snap, saved only by a shelter worker who'd found her unconscious near the East River. She tucked the card into her jacket pocket and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to Marco's offer. By morning, as weak sunlight filtered through the grey clouds, Patricia had made her decision. She used the last of her change to take the subway to Midtown, her heart pounding as she approached the luxury hotel on Lexington Avenue. The doorman looked at her with barely concealed disgust, but she showed him the business card and mentioned the suite number. His expression changed immediately to one of professional neutrality. "Of course, ma'am. Right this way." Suite 2847 was unlike anything Patricia had seen outside of movies. The living room alone was larger than her old apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Marco stood by the window, on a phone call that he ended the moment she entered. "You came," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Good. That shows you're practical. Let me explain what tomorrow will involve." The next 12 hours transformed Patricia's life in ways she couldn't have imagined. Marco had arranged for a team of professionals to arrive at the suite, a hairstylist named Dominique, who spoke with a French accent and tutted over the condition of Patricia's hair, a makeup artist called Jasmine, who examined Patricia's face with the intensity of a surgeon, and a personal shopper named Eleanor, who took measurements and asked questions about Patricia's preferences with genuine interest. "What's your favorite color?" Eleanor asked, her tablet ready to take notes. Patricia hesitated. I haven't thought about that in a long time." "Close your eyes," Elena said gently. "Think back to when you were young, when you could be anything you wanted. What color makes you feel powerful?" "Emerald green," Patricia said after a moment. "My mother had this emerald dress she wore to special occasions. She always looked like royalty in it." Eleanor smiled. "Perfect. I know exactly what to get." While Eleanor disappeared to procure the dress, Dominique worked on Patricia's hair. The transformation took hours. First a trim to remove the damaged ends, then a deep conditioning treatment, followed by a subtle dye to restore her natural chestnut color and cover the gray that had prematurely appeared during her time on the streets. As Dominique worked, she told stories about her other clients, about fashion weeks in Paris and Milan, about celebrities who treated her like a confidant. Patricia found herself relaxing, allowing herself to be cared for in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Jasmine approached with her arsenal of cosmetics. "I'm not going to make you look like someone else," she explained. "I'm going to help you look like the best version of yourself, the woman you would have become if life hadn't taken those hard turns." As Jasmine applied foundation and contour, Patricia caught glimpses of herself in the mirror. With each layer, with each brushstroke, a different person emerged. Not someone unrecognizable, but someone she vaguely remembered being, someone confident, someone who belonged in rooms where decisions were made and power was wielded. Marco returned to the suite as the transformation neared completion. He'd been gone most of the day, attending to business that he didn't explain and Patricia didn't ask about. He carried a small box, which he set on the coffee table. "How are we doing?" he asked, examining Patricia, with an appraising eye that was professional rather than personal. "Almost finished," Dominique said. "Give us another hour." Marco nodded and sat down, opening his laptop to continue working. Patricia noticed how he moved, every gesture deliberate, every action purposeful. This was a man who'd learned to control not just others but himself, to never show weakness or uncertainty. She wondered what had happened in his life to forge such rigid self-discipline. When Elena returned, she carried several garment bags and shoeboxes. She'd brought options, she explained, wanting to ensure the perfect fit and look. The emerald green dress she'd selected was stunning, a floor-length gown with a subtle shimmer, a modest neckline, and a back that dipped just low enough to be elegant without being ostentatious. The fabric moved like water when Patricia put it on, and for the first time in 2 years she felt beautiful. "We need to talk about tomorrow," Marco said once the team had finished and departed. He gestured for Patricia to sit. "The wedding starts at 6. We'll arrive at 7 after the ceremony, but before the reception is in full swing. I need you to understand who William Chen is and why this matters." Patricia settled into the chair, the emerald dress rustling softly. "I'm listening." "William Chen runs one of the most sophisticated smuggling operations on the East Coast," Marco began. "Luxury goods, art, electronics, anything that can be moved across borders and sold for profit. He's been encroaching on territory that my family has controlled for 3 generations. 5 months ago, he made a move that cost us significantly. Tomorrow's wedding is his way of showing the world that he's untouchable, that he's arrived at a level of legitimacy that puts him beyond reach." "And you're crashing his wedding to send a message," Patricia said. "I'm attending his wedding," Marco corrected. "I was invited, actually. William wants to show that he's so powerful that even his enemies have to pay respect." What he doesn't know is that I'm not coming to show respect. I'm coming to remind him that the game isn't over, that every moment of peace he enjoys is provisional. Why do you need me for that? Patricia asked. You could make that statement by showing up alone. Marco leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. Because William knows I'm alone. My wife died 3 years ago, and I haven't been seen with anyone since. Showing up with you, someone beautiful, mysterious, someone he can't immediately identify or place, it raises questions. It shows that I'm not isolated, that I have resources he doesn't know about, connections he can't trace. In our world, uncertainty is a weapon, and you are that uncertainty. Patricia absorbed this information, feeling the weight of what she was agreeing to. What do you need me to do? Stay close to me, look confident, and if anyone asks who you are, tell them you're my guest and leave it at that. Don't elaborate, don't explain. Mystery is more powerful than any backstory we could invent. Marco stood and walked to the window. There's something else you should know. William's bride, Catherine Munro, comes from old money, real estate magnates who've owned half of Manhattan since the 1800s. This marriage is William's entry into legitimate high society, but Catherine doesn't know the full extent of what William does. She thinks he's a successful international businessman with shipping interests. Does that matter? Patricia asked. It might, Marco said cryptically. Love makes people blind, but it also makes them vulnerable. And vulnerability in the right circumstances can be exploited. The rest of the evening was spent on details: how to walk in the heels Elena had selected, how to hold a champagne glass, how to make small talk without revealing anything substantial. Marco was a patient teacher, correcting Patricia's posture and diction with the precision of someone who understood that in certain worlds, every gesture communicated something. You're quick, Marco observed as they practiced. You pick things up faster than I expected. I used to be a paralegal, Patricia said. I know how to read a room and adapt to different audiences. I just forgot how to do it while I was surviving. Good, Marco said. Hold on to that. Tomorrow you're not Patricia the homeless woman. You're Patricia the mystery, the unknown variable in an equation that William thought he'd already solved. The Plaza Hotel gleamed with the kind of opulence that reminded people why New York City had been a symbol of American wealth for over a century. The facade was lit with subtle spotlights, and a red carpet led from the street to the entrance, lined with photographers whose cameras flashed like lightning as guests arrived. Patricia stepped out of Marco's black Mercedes, her emerald dress catching the light, and felt a moment of pure terror mixed with exhilaration. Marco offered his arm with practiced grace. Remember, he murmured as they walked toward the entrance, you belong here. Confidence isn't about knowing everything. It's about acting like you do. The interior of the plaza was even more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, and the marble floors reflected the warm glow of thousands of candles. Guests mingled in clusters, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos creating a sea of refined elegance. Patricia recognized faces from magazines and television, politicians, business moguls, celebrities who'd made their fortunes in film and finance. William Chen stood near the entrance to the grand ballroom, greeting guests with his new bride. He was younger than Patricia expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of precise features and confident bearing that suggested someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. His tuxedo was bespoke, probably Savile Row, and his watch caught the light, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars. Catherine Munro was breathtaking in her wedding dress, a custom Vera Wang that combined classic elegance with modern sophistication. She had honey blonde hair styled in soft waves, and her smile seemed genuine as she greeted each guest. Patricia found herself wondering what Catherine would think if she knew the truth about the man she'd just married, about the empire built on smuggled goods and compromised officials. William's expression changed subtly when he saw Marco approaching. His smile remained, but something hardened in his eyes. Marco Salvatore, he said, extending his hand. I'm honored you could make it. Congratulations, William, Marco replied, shaking his hand with just enough pressure to communicate equality. May your marriage be as successful as your business ventures. William's eyes shifted to Patricia, and she saw the calculation there, the immediate assessment of who she might be and what she represented. And who is your lovely companion? This is Patricia, Marco said, offering no surname or explanation. She's been kind enough to join me this evening. Catherine extended her hand with genuine warmth. It's lovely to meet you, Patricia. That dress is absolutely stunning. Emerald is definitely your color. Thank you, Patricia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And congratulations on your marriage. The venue is beautiful. They moved into the grand ballroom, where tables were arranged around a central dance floor. The ceiling was draped with white silk, and thousands of small lights that created the illusion of stars. Each table featured elaborate centerpieces of white roses and orchids, and the place settings were fine china with gold trim. A live orchestra played soft jazz in one corner, and waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like miniature works of art. Marco guided Patricia to their assigned table, Table 7, deliberately positioned where they would be visible but not central. The placement itself was a message, William acknowledging Marco's status, while also reminding him that he wasn't part of the inner circle. "This is incredible," Patricia whispered as they sat down. "I've never seen anything like this." William wanted to make a statement, Marco replied quietly. "This wedding probably cost close to $2 million. Every detail is designed to communicate power and legitimacy." The other guests at their table introduced themselves. A real estate developer named Richard and his wife Amanda, a hedge fund manager called Jonathan, and a woman named Sophia, who owned a gallery in Chelsea. The conversation flowed easily, covering art, travel, and the latest developments in Manhattan's luxury real estate market. Patricia found herself contributing to the discussion, drawing on knowledge from her previous life and improvising when necessary. "So how did you and Marco meet?" Amanda asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Patricia felt Marco's hand subtly touch her back, a reminder to keep it simple. "We met through mutual acquaintances," she said with a slight smile. "Sometimes the best connections happen unexpectedly." "That's beautifully put," Sophia said. "There's something refreshing about people who don't feel the need to document and broadcast every moment of their lives. Mystery is becoming a lost art." As dinner was served, a first course of seared foie gras, followed by herb-crusted Chilean sea bass, and finished with a chocolate soufflé that melted on the tongue, Patricia observed the room. She noticed the subtle hierarchies, the way certain tables received more attention from William and Catherine, the way conversations shifted when powerful people moved through the space. She saw men in expensive suits making deals over dessert, women exchanging business cards between courses, and throughout it all the underlying current of competition and ambition that drove this world. William Chen moved through the room like a king surveying his kingdom, stopping at each table to exchange pleasantries and reinforce connections. When he reached table 7, his attention focused primarily on Marco. "I hope you're enjoying yourself, Marco," William said, his tone cordial but with an edge underneath. "I know these affairs can be tedious for some." "On the contrary," Marco replied, "I always enjoy observing how people celebrate their victories. It's instructive." The two men held eye contact for a moment longer than comfortable, and Patricia sensed the tension between them. Years of rivalry and competition condensed into that brief exchange. "And Patricia," William said, turning his attention to her, "I hope Marco is proving to be good company. He can be rather intense." "I appreciate intensity," Patricia replied smoothly. "It's better than shallow charm that masks nothing of substance." William's smile became more genuine, as if he appreciated the verbal sparring. "Well said. Enjoy the rest of the evening." He moved on to the next table, and Patricia felt Marco's approval in the slight relaxation of his posture. "That was well done," Marco murmured. "You're a natural at this." As the evening progressed, the orchestra shifted from background music to dance numbers. Couples moved onto the floor, and Catherine's face glowed with happiness as William led her in their first dance. Patricia watched them, seeing the genuine affection in Catherine's eyes, and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Whatever William Chen's sins, Catherine loved him, and that love was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. "Would you like to dance?" Marco asked, standing and offering his hand. Patricia hesitated, then accepted. As they moved onto the floor, she realized that Marco was an excellent dancer, his movements confident and controlled, guiding her through the waltz with practiced ease. For a moment, Patricia allowed herself to forget about the deception, about the poverty she'd left behind that morning, about the uncertain future that awaited her. For this one moment, she was simply a woman at an elegant wedding, dancing with a handsome partner, surrounded by beauty and music. "You're smiling," Marco observed. "I'd forgotten what this felt like." Patricia admitted. Being treated like a human being rather than an inconvenience to be stepped over. Something flickered across Marco's face. Was it empathy? Regret? It disappeared so quickly that Patricia couldn't be sure. Tomorrow you'll have $5,000 and the beginning of a new start, he said. What will you do with it? I don't know yet, Patricia replied honestly. Part of me wants to leave New York, go somewhere where no one knows me and I can truly start over. Another part thinks I owe it to myself to stay and rebuild what I lost here. Both are valid choices, Marco said. But remember, running away and starting over are not the same thing. One is about escape, the other about reconstruction. Make sure you know which one you're choosing. The music shifted to something more upbeat, and they returned to their table. Patricia noticed that William and Catherine had also left the dance floor, moving through the room to thank guests for attending. As they approached table 7 again, Patricia observed something that made her breath catch. Catherine's expression had changed. The joy from earlier had been replaced by something else. Confusion? Concern? She was looking at William differently, as if seeing him for the first time. The champagne flowed freely as the evening deepened, and the atmosphere in the grand ballroom grew more relaxed. Guests who'd started the evening with careful formality now laughed more freely, their conversations growing louder and more animated. Patricia sipped her champagne slowly, maintaining the facade of sophisticated guest while her mind raced with observations. She noticed Catherine Monroe Chen excusing herself from a conversation with a group of her relatives, her face pale despite the warm lighting. The bride moved toward a side door that led to what Patricia assumed were the hotel's private corridors. And something about her body language, the slight hunch of her shoulders, the way she clutched her small beaded purse, suggested distress rather than a simple bathroom break. I need to powder my nose, Patricia told Marco, standing before he could object. She followed at a discreet distance, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The corridor beyond the grand ballroom was quieter, lined with Baroque mirrors and small sitting areas. Catherine had stopped in one of these alcoves, leaning against a console table as she fumbled with her phone, her hands trembling. Patricia hesitated, instinct warring with curiosity. This wasn't her business. She was here to play a role, collect her money and disappear. But something about Catherine's distress pulled at her. Maybe it was the memory of her own moments of devastating discovery, or maybe it was simply human compassion that life hadn't completely beaten out of her. Are you all right? Patricia asked gently, approaching slowly so as not to startle the bride. Catherine looked up, tears pooling in her eyes that hadn't yet fallen. Up close, Patricia could see that she was younger than she'd appeared from a distance, probably only 28 or 29, with the kind of smooth skin and delicate features that came from good genetics and expensive skincare. I'm fine, Catherine said automatically, then laughed bitterly. No, I'm not fine. I'm very much not fine. She studied Patricia for a moment. You're with Marco Salvatore, aren't you? I'm his guest tonight, yes, Patricia said carefully. Do you know what he does? What my husband does? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia chose her words carefully. I know that their business relationship is complicated. Catherine's laugh was hollow. That's one way to put it. She held up her phone, her hand still shaking. I just received an email. An anonymous email with documents attached. Shipping manifests, customs records, bank account statements. All showing exactly what William's international business really involves. Her voice broke. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have known? Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. Someone had sent those documents during the wedding. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone wanted Catherine to discover the truth on what should have been the happiest night of her life. Patricia's mind immediately went to Marco. Had this been his plan all along? Was bringing Patricia just misdirection while he executed a more devastating attack? What are you going to do? Patricia asked. I don't know, Catherine said, tears finally spilling down her carefully made-up face. Part of me wants to confront him right now in front of everyone. Part of me wants to pretend I never saw these emails and go back to the ignorance I had an hour ago. And part of me, she paused, wiping at her eyes, part of me knew, deep down. I knew something wasn't quite right, but I loved him so much that I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Patricia recognized that feeling. She'd done the same thing with David, ignoring the signs of his growing resentment, his pulling away, until the day he finally left. Love had a way of making people willfully blind to truths that would shatter their carefully constructed worlds. You deserve better than lies, Patricia said. Whatever you decide to do, make sure it's your decision, not one made out of fear or pressure. Catherine looked at her with surprise. That's not what I expected you to say. I thought you'd tell me to forgive him, or that ignorance is bliss, or some other platitude. I've learned that platitudes don't help much when your world is falling apart, Patricia replied. Sometimes the kindest thing is just honest acknowledgement that the situation is terrible. A slight smile crossed Catherine's face. Thank you for that. She straightened, taking a deep breath and checking her reflection in a nearby mirror. I should get back before people notice I'm missing. What will you tell William? Patricia asked. Nothing. Not yet. Catherine's expression hardened with a resolve that transformed her face. But I'm going to find out who sent those documents and why, and then I'm going to decide what to do with the information. On my terms, in my time. Patricia watched Catherine return to the grand ballroom, her posture once again regal, despite the emotional turmoil that must be raging inside. Patricia waited a few minutes before following, her mind churning with questions. When she returned to table 7, Marco's expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked Catherine's movement through the room. Everything all right? He asked as Patricia sat down. Fine, she replied, studying his face for any tell. Just needed some air. The evening continued, but Patricia noticed the subtle changes in Catherine's behavior. She maintained her smile and her gracious hostess demeanor, but there was a new tension in her shoulders, a guardedness in her eyes. William seemed oblivious, basking in the success of the evening, accepting congratulations and making toasts with the confidence of a man who believed he'd secured everything he'd ever wanted. Around midnight, as the party began to wind down and guests started making their departures, Marco signaled that it was time to leave. They made their way to William and Catherine, offering final congratulations and thanks for the invitation. It's been a memorable evening, Marco said to William, shaking his hand. I'm sure you and Catherine will have a wonderful life together. Thank you for coming, William replied, his grip firm. It means something that you're here. Catherine hugged Patricia unexpectedly, whispering in her ear, Thank you for your kindness, I won't forget it. In the car back to Marco's hotel, Patricia finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Did you send those documents to Catherine? Marco turned to look at her, his expression revealing nothing. What documents? Don't play games with me, Patricia said, her voice harder than she'd intended. Someone sent Catherine evidence of William's operations during the wedding. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Was it you? Marco was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights of Manhattan slide past the window. What did Catherine tell you? That she received an anonymous email with proof of what William really does, that she's trying to decide what to do with the information. And what do you think she'll do? Marco asked, still not answering her question. I think she'll wait, gather more information and then make a decision that serves her interests, Patricia replied. She's not stupid and she's not weak. She's just been lied to by someone she trusted. Marco nodded slowly. Then my assessment of her was correct. William chose well, which is unfortunate for him in the long run. So it was you, Patricia said. I didn't say that, Marco replied. But let's say, hypothetically, that someone wanted to introduce instability into William's life at the moment he felt most secure. Would that be such a terrible thing? William has built his empire on exploiting vulnerabilities in markets, in regulations, in people. Perhaps it's fitting that his own vulnerability would come from the person he loves most. Patricia felt a mix of admiration and revulsion. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. Instead of attacking William directly, Marco had planted seeds of doubt and betrayal in the one relationship William valued above all others. It was psychological warfare at its most effective. That's monstrous, Patricia said quietly. That's survival, Marco corrected. In my world, you use every advantage you have, or you end up dead or in prison. Sentiment is a luxury that gets you killed. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Back at the hotel suite, Marco retrieved an envelope from the safe and handed it to Patricia. Inside was $5,000 in $100 bills, along with a key card and a piece of paper. The key is for a different hotel, the Hilton on 6th Avenue, Marco explained. I've paid for a room for the next 2 weeks. The paper has the contact information for a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to William, who runs a rehabilitation and placement service. She helps people transition from homelessness back into stable housing and employment. I've made a donation to her organization and arranged for you to meet with her next week." Patricia stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing this? You got what you needed from me tonight. Because you played your part well and because—" Marco paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because sometimes helping someone else is the only way to remember you're still human. I've done things I'm not proud of, Patricia, things that keep me awake at night. Maybe helping you is my way of balancing the scales, even if just a little." "That's a beautiful sentiment," Patricia said, "but it doesn't make what you did to Catherine any less cruel." "No, it doesn't," Marco agreed. "But Catherine now has information she can use to protect herself. Whether she chooses to use it or not is her decision. I didn't take away her choices. I gave her more options, even if those options come with pain." Patricia left the hotel early the next morning, the envelope tucked safely in her purse, along with the contact information Marco had provided. As she walked through the streets of Manhattan, the city looked different than it had just 2 days ago. She wasn't looking at it from the bottom anymore, but from somewhere in between. Not at the top, but no longer at the bottom either. The space in between was uncertain and uncomfortable, but it was also full of possibility. The Hilton room was modest compared to Marco's suite at the plaza, but to Patricia it felt like paradise. A real bed with clean sheets, a bathroom with hot water that didn't run out, a television, and most importantly a door that locked from the inside. She spent the first day mostly sleeping, her body finally able to relax after months of hypervigilance on the streets. On the second day she forced herself to venture out, using some of the money Marco had given her to buy basic necessities, clothes from Target, rather than designer boutiques, toiletries, a cheap phone so she could make calls. The emerald dress hung in the closet, a reminder of the surreal evening that had changed her trajectory. The news broke on the third day. Patricia was having coffee in a diner on 8th Avenue when she saw the headline on someone's discarded newspaper, "Shipping magnate William Chen under federal investigation." The article detailed allegations of smuggling, tax evasion, and customs violations. Anonymous sources had provided authorities with extensive documentation, and federal agents had raided Chen's offices and warehouses the previous evening. Patricia's hand trembled as she read the article. Catherine had acted, and she'd acted decisively. Rather than confronting William privately or simply leaving him, she'd taken the evidence to federal authorities. The article mentioned that Mrs. Catherine Chen was cooperating with investigators and had retained her own legal counsel separate from her husband's. Patricia wondered if Marco had anticipated this outcome. Had he known that Catherine would not just discover the truth, but would weaponize it? Or had he simply set chaos in motion and let it run its course? Her phone rang. The new cheap phone that only one person had the number for. Marco's voice was calm when she answered. "I assume you've seen the news," he said. "Did you know she would go to the FBI?" Patricia asked. "I suspected she might, given the right push. Catherine comes from a family with strong principles about law and order. They built their fortune legitimately, and they take pride in that. Once she knew the truth about William, there were really only 2 options. She could choose love over principles, or principles over love. She chose principles. William's life is over," Patricia said. "His business, his reputation, maybe his freedom. William made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences," Marco replied. "I merely provided information. Catherine made her decision independently." "That's a convenient way to absolve yourself of responsibility," Patricia said. "Perhaps," Marco acknowledged. "But tell me, Patricia, do you think William Chen deserves your sympathy? A man who's smuggled counterfeit pharmaceuticals that have killed people? Who's moved stolen art that helps fund terrorist organizations? Who's bribed officials and corrupted institutions?" Patricia didn't have a good answer to that. "What about Catherine? She's suffering too, and she didn't do anything wrong except love the wrong person." "Catherine is stronger than you think," Marco said. "This pain will pass, and she'll emerge from it wiser and more capable. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is force them to see the truth, even when that truth hurts." They talked for a few more minutes before Marco ended the call. Patricia sat in the diner long after her coffee grew cold, thinking about choices and consequences, about the ripple effects of single decisions, about how one evening could redirect multiple lives. The following week, Patricia met with Dr. Sarah Chen, as Marco had arranged. Dr. Chen's office was in a modest building in Chelsea, and the woman herself was in her 50s, with kind eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that Patricia immediately appreciated. "Marco told me about your situation," Dr. Chen began. "He didn't provide details, but he said you're looking to rebuild your life after a difficult period." "That's accurate," Patricia said. "I was homeless for about 2 years. Before that, I was a paralegal, but I developed an addiction problem after an accident and lost everything." Dr. Chen nodded, writing notes. "Are you currently using?" "No," Patricia said. "I've been clean for 6 months. The streets have a way of forcing you to get clean or die, and I decided I wanted to live." "Good," Dr. Chen said. "That's the hardest part. Everything else is just logistics and hard work." She pulled out several folders. "I have a few options for you. There's a transitional housing program in Queens that would give you a room for up to a year while you get back on your feet. There's also a legal aid organization that's looking for someone with paralegal experience to help with case management. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. And there's a community college program that offers free courses for people rebuilding after homelessness." Patricia felt tears prick her eyes. These were real options, real possibilities. "How do I even begin to thank you?" "You don't thank me," Dr. Chen said with a slight smile. "You succeed. You take these opportunities and you build something with them. And then, someday when you're stable, you help someone else who's where you are now. That's how this works." Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia threw herself into reconstruction. She enrolled in the transitional housing program, started the job at the legal aid organization, and signed up for 2 courses at the community college, business law and accounting. The work was exhausting, and there were moments when she wanted to give up, when the comfort of old destructive patterns called to her. But she pushed through, remembering Marco's words about the difference between running away and starting over. The William Chen story continued to dominate the news. More details emerged about the scope of his smuggling operations, about the network of corrupt officials he'd cultivated, about the legitimate businesses he'd used as fronts. Catherine filed for divorce and returned to using her maiden name, Monroe. She gave a single interview to the New York Times, speaking with dignity about the importance of integrity and the courage it took to do the right thing, even when it meant destroying your own life in the process. "I loved my husband," Catherine told the interviewer. "I still love the man I thought he was, but I can't ignore what he did, and I can't be complicit through my silence. Sometimes love requires you to make impossible choices, and you have to hope that you have the strength to make the right one." Patricia cut out that article and kept it folded in her wallet, a reminder that strength came in many forms. 3 months after the wedding, Patricia's life had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. She lived in a small room in the Queens Transitional Housing Facility, sharing a kitchen and bathroom with 3 other women who were also rebuilding their lives. The job at the legal aid organization had become more than just a paycheck. She genuinely enjoyed helping people navigate the complex legal system, using her old paralegal skills to make a difference in lives that were as difficult as hers had been. She hadn't heard from Marco since their phone conversation after William's arrest. She assumed their brief connection was over, a transactional relationship that had served its purpose for both of them. So she was surprised when she received a text message from his number one Thursday afternoon. "Would you be free for dinner tomorrow evening? I have something to discuss with you." Patricia's first instinct was to decline. She'd moved on from that world, and returning to it even for an evening felt dangerous, like tempting fate or awakening old desires for things she couldn't have. But curiosity won out, and she texted back her agreement. They met at a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, the kind of place where the owner knew the regular customers by name, and the wine list was written on a chalkboard. Marco was already there when Patricia arrived, sitting at a corner table that offered privacy without ostentation. He stood when she approached, and Patricia noticed he looked tired, not physically, but something deeper, as if the weight he carried had grown heavier. "Thank you for meeting me," Marco said as they sat down. "You look well. Life is treating you better?" "Much better," Patricia confirmed. "The housing situation is stable, the job is good, and I'm taking classes. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm moving in the right direction." "I'm glad to hear that," Marco said, and he seemed to genuinely mean it. "I've been following your progress through Dr. Chen. She tells me you're one of her success stories." "You've been checking up on me?" Patricia asked, not sure how to feel about that. "I like to know that my investments are sound," Marco said with a slight smile. "But that's not why I asked you here. I wanted to tell you something, and I wanted to apologize." Patricia's eyebrows rose. Apologize for what? Marco took a sip of wine before answering. For using you. I told myself I was helping you, and I was to a degree. But my primary motivation was using you as a prop in my war with William Chen. You were a means to an end, and you deserved better than that. I knew what I was signing up for, Patricia said. You were honest about what you needed from me. Honest about the surface, perhaps, but not about the full extent of what I'd set in motion, Marco replied. I didn't tell you that I'd sent those documents to Catherine. I didn't tell you that your presence was partly misdirection, keeping attention on the obvious provocation while the real attack happened behind the scenes. You got caught up in something much larger and more dangerous than you knew. Patricia thought about this, remembering the evening of the wedding, Catherine's tears in the corridor, the federal investigation that followed. Did you know she would go to the FBI? I suspected it was a possibility, yes, Marco admitted. Catherine's family has a long history of civic responsibility. Her grandfather was a federal judge. Her father sits on several corporate ethics boards. Once she knew the truth, there was a reasonable chance she'd feel compelled to act on it. And if she hadn't, if she'd just left William quietly, or chosen to stay with him despite knowing what he did, then William would have been destabilized in a different way. His marriage strained, his judgment compromised by emotional turmoil. Either outcome served my purposes. Marco leaned back in his chair. I'm not telling you this to excuse what I did, but to be honest about it. You deserved honesty then, and you deserve it now. The waiter arrived with their meals, osso buco for Marco, seafood risotto for Patricia, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Patricia processed what Marco had told her, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. She was angry at being used, but she also recognized that without Marco's intervention, she'd still be on the streets. Could she condemn him for manipulating her when that manipulation had ultimately saved her life? Why tell me this now? Patricia finally asked. Why not just let me believe the sanitized version? Because I've been thinking a lot about choices and consequences lately, Marco said. William Chen is looking at 20 years in federal prison. His empire is dismantled, his reputation destroyed. Catherine has divorced him and moved on with her life. On paper, I won. But the victory feels hollow because of the methods I used to achieve it. Are you having a crisis of conscience? Patricia asked, not entirely without sympathy. Perhaps, Marco admitted. Or maybe I'm just getting old and tired. My wife used to tell me that you can only compromise your principles so many times before you forget what they were in the first place. I dismissed her concerns back then, but now I wonder if she was right. Patricia studied Marco's face, seeing the lines of stress and weariness that she hadn't noticed at the wedding. What happened to your wife? You mentioned she died. Marco's expression shifted, pain flickering across his features. Cancer. Ovarian cancer that we didn't catch until it was too late. She died 3 years ago next month. We'd been married for 18 years. I'm sorry, Patricia said, and meant it. She wanted me to get out of the business, Marco continued. Retire. Move somewhere quiet. Maybe start a legitimate company or just travel and enjoy whatever time we had left. But I kept putting it off, telling her I needed to secure our future first, to eliminate threats and consolidate power. And then she was gone. And all that power and security meant nothing because the person I'd been securing it for was no longer there. They finished their meal, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Patricia's classes, the eccentric characters at her housing facility, Marco's attempt to learn to cook now that he was spending more evenings alone. When the check came, Marco insisted on paying, and they walked out into the cool November evening. I have a proposition for you, Marco said as they stood on the sidewalk. And before you say no, hear me out. I'm starting a foundation, a legitimate foundation that helps people transition out of homelessness, addiction, and poverty. Dr. Chen has agreed to serve as the clinical director. I'd like you to consider working for the foundation once you finish your courses and get more experience. We need people who understand the system from both sides, who can connect with clients because they've been where those clients are. Patricia was speechless for a moment. You're serious? Completely serious, Marco said. I can't undo the things I've done, but I can try to do better going forward. And I can't think of better help than someone who understands both the fall and the climb back up. I'll think about it, Patricia said carefully, but I'm not making any promises. I need to focus on my own recovery right now, on building something stable before I try to help others. That's fair, Marco agreed. The offer stands whenever you're ready. He turned to leave, then paused. "Patricia, thank you for giving me a second chance to be honest with you. Not everyone would have been willing to hear me out." Patricia watched him walk away, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians and traffic. She stood there for a long time, thinking about redemption and second chances, about the complicated ways that people could be both harmful and helpful, destructive and constructive. Life, she was learning, rarely offered simple narratives of heroes and villains. Most people existed in the grey spaces between, making imperfect choices with incomplete information, trying to balance survival with principles that grew harder to maintain with each compromise. 4 months after William Chen's arrest, Patricia received an unexpected phone call. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Catherine Monroe's personal assistant, asking if Patricia would be available to meet with Mrs. Monroe for lunch the following week. Surprised but curious, Patricia agreed. They met at a small French bistro on the Upper East Side, a place that managed to be elegant without being ostentatious. Catherine arrived promptly, looking composed in a navy suit that suggested business rather than lunch with a friend. But when she saw Patricia, her professional demeanor softened into something more genuine. "Thank you for meeting with me," Catherine said as they sat down. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I was curious," Patricia admitted. "How are you doing? I've seen some of the news coverage." Catherine laughed, but it was tinged with bitterness. "The news coverage has been relentless. I've become the poster child for woman who stood up to criminal husband, which is both empowering and exhausting. Every interview request, every profile piece, every podcast wants to talk about the wedding, the discovery, the divorce. Sometimes I feel like I'm being defined entirely by William's crimes and my reaction to them." "That must be incredibly difficult," Patricia said. "It is," Catherine acknowledged, "but I'm managing. I've started working with a victims' rights organization, helping other people whose lives have been impacted by white-collar crime. It gives me purpose beyond just being the woman who turned in her husband." The waiter took their orders, salads for both, in that peculiarly New York way where wealthy women eat remarkably little at lunch. And Catherine leaned forward, her expression serious. "I wanted to talk to you because you were there that night and because you were kind to me in the hallway when I was falling apart," Catherine began. "I've been trying to piece together what happened, who sent those documents and why. I have my suspicions, of course. Marco Salvatore would be the obvious candidate." Patricia chose her words carefully. "I don't know for certain who sent the documents. But you have suspicions too," Catherine said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not asking you to betray any confidences, but I am asking you to be honest with me. Do you think Marco sent them?" Patricia met Catherine's gaze steadily. "Yes, I think he did. I think he saw an opportunity to destabilize William by introducing chaos into his personal life, and he took it." Catherine nodded slowly, as if Patricia had confirmed something she'd already concluded. "I thought so. For a while I was angry about that, furious that he'd manipulated my life for his own purposes. But the anger has faded, and what's left is more complicated." "How so?" Patricia asked. "Because he gave me information I needed to have, even if his motivations weren't pure," Catherine explained. "I was living a lie, and I might have continued living that lie for years if someone hadn't forced me to see the truth. Was it cruel to do it on my wedding day? Yes. Was it manipulative? Absolutely. But was it ultimately the right thing for me to know? Also, yes." Patricia thought about her own experiences with difficult truths, with information that shattered comfortable illusions. "I understand that. Sometimes kindness and cruelty aren't as clearly defined as we'd like them to be." "Exactly," Catherine said. "Which brings me to why I asked you here. I'm curious about your relationship with Marco. Are you—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Involved with him?" "No," Patricia said quickly. "I met him only days before the wedding. He hired me to accompany him to the event, paid me for my time, and helped me get back on my feet. That's the extent of our relationship." Catherine studied Patricia's face, seeming to assess the truth of her words. "He helped you. How?" Patricia made a split-second decision to be honest. She told Catherine about being homeless, about Marco's offer, about the money and the connection to Dr. Chen's program. She didn't include certain details, like Marco's admission about sending the documents, but she provided enough for Catherine to understand the broader picture. "So he used you as a prop while simultaneously rescuing you," Catherine said when Patricia finished. "That's very Marco, doing something good and something manipulative at the same time. probably not even seeing the contradiction. You seem to know him well, Patricia observed. I know of him, Catherine corrected. Our families have intersected in various social circles over the years. Before I met William, I knew Marco's wife, Eleanor. She was lovely, cultured, intelligent, with a warmth that seemed incongruous with being married to someone like Marco. She used to say that Marco wasn't a bad man, just a man who'd been trained to survive in a bad world. She believed there was goodness in him, that he'd buried under layers of protection and pragmatism. Do you think she was right? Patricia asked. I think she was probably right, but I also think that buried goodness doesn't excuse the harm done by the layers on top of it, Catherine replied. Marco may have noble intentions deep down, but his actions have consequences for real people, like me, like you, like William, who despite everything, I did love. Do you still love him? Patricia asked gently. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, stirring her untouched salad with her fork. I love who I thought he was. I'm not sure I ever really knew the real William. How do you love someone you don't truly know? They finished their lunch, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, Catherine's work with the Victims' Rights Organization, Patricia's progress in her classes, the surprising difficulty of rebuilding a life after it's been shattered. As they prepared to leave, Catherine reached out and squeezed Patricia's hand. Thank you for being honest with me, Catherine said. And thank you for that night, for being kind when you didn't have to be. It meant more than you know. What will you do now? Patricia asked. After the trial? After everything settles? I'm going to live, Catherine said simply. I'm going to build a life that's mine based on truth rather than comfortable lies. I'm going to help people, do meaningful work, and maybe eventually learn to trust again. That's all any of us can do, right? Pick up the pieces and build something new from the wreckage. Patricia watched Catherine leave the restaurant, her posture straight and her steps confident despite the weight she carried. There was strength in Catherine that Patricia admired, the strength to act on principle even when it meant destroying her own happiness, the strength to move forward rather than dwelling in bitterness, the strength to build something constructive from painful truths. That evening, Patricia sat in her small room and thought about the interconnected lives that had collided that night at the plaza. Marco, seeking revenge through manipulation. Catherine, discovering truths she wished she didn't know. William, building an empire on lies that inevitably collapsed. And herself, used as a pawn, but ultimately given a path back to stability. Each of them had made choices, and those choices had rippled outward, affecting people they'd never met in ways they couldn't have predicted. Patricia pulled out her phone and scrolled to Marco's number. She typed out a message. I had lunch with Catherine today. She's stronger than you probably expected. I've been thinking about your foundation offer. I'm interested, but I need 6 more months to finish my program and get more stable. Can we talk about it then? Marco's response came quickly. Take all the time you need. The foundation isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. I'm glad Catherine is doing well. She deserves happiness after everything. Patricia set the phone down and looked around her small room, at the second-hand furniture, the textbooks stacked on the desk, the calendar marking her progress through the transitional housing program. It wasn't much, but it was hers, built on honest work rather than charity or manipulation. For the first time in years, she felt like she was becoming someone she could respect. 6 months passed, and Patricia's life continued its upward trajectory. She completed her courses with high marks, earned a promotion at the legal aid organization that came with a modest salary increase, and moved from transitional housing into her own studio apartment in Astoria. It was tiny, barely 400 square feet, but it had a working kitchen, a bathroom that was entirely hers, and windows that let in morning sunlight. She cried the first night she spent there, overwhelmed by the simple joy of having a space she could call home. The William Chen trial had dominated headlines for months. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, the documents Catherine had turned over, testimonies from cooperating witnesses, financial records that traced money through multiple shell companies. William's defense team tried to argue entrapment and prosecutorial overreach, but the evidence was too substantial. In March, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 17 counts of smuggling, tax evasion, and customs violations. Patricia watched the sentencing hearing on the courthouse steps during her lunch break, streaming it on her phone. William stood before the judge, his expensive suit unable to hide how much prison had already diminished him. The judge sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. Catherine wasn't in the courtroom. She'd chosen to move forward rather than witness the final chapter of her former life. That evening, Patricia finally called Marco about the foundation position. They met at his office in Midtown, a sleek space with modern art on the walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Marco looked healthier than he had at their last meeting. Some of the weariness lifted from his features. "Welcome," he said, gesturing for Patricia to sit. "Dr. Chen tells me you've been doing excellent work at the legal aid organization. They're sorry to see you go." "I'm not leaving immediately," Patricia clarified. "I want to finish out the current cases I'm working on, give them time to find a replacement. Maybe another month or two." "That's professional of you," Marco said approvingly. "Let me tell you about what we're building." He pulled up plans on his computer, a comprehensive program that would provide not just housing assistance but job training, mental health services, addiction counseling, and legal support. The foundation had purchased a building in the Bronx that was being renovated to include both office space and temporary housing units. Dr. Chen had hired a team of social workers and counselors, and they were partnering with several corporations to create job placement programs. "Your role would be client advocacy and legal services coordinator," Marco explained. "You'd work with clients to navigate legal issues, eviction proceedings, custody disputes, outstanding warrants, civil rights violations. You'd also train other staff members on legal basics and coordinate with pro bono attorneys who've agreed to take cases." "It sounds perfect," Patricia said, feeling a flutter of excitement. "Almost too perfect." "What's the catch?" "The catch is that it's going to be hard work with limited resources, and clients who are dealing with trauma, addiction, and mental illness," Marco replied honestly. "You'll have days when you feel like you're not making a difference, when clients relapse or disappear or reject help. You'll deal with bureaucracy and funding issues, and all the frustrations of trying to fix systemic problems with limited tools." "I've lived those frustrations," Patricia said. "I know what it's like to be on the other side of that bureaucracy, to have people trying to help who don't understand what you're actually going through. That's why I think I can do this job well." Marco smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. "That's exactly why I want you for this position. When can you start?" They spent the next hour discussing details: salary, more than Patricia had dared hope for, benefits, start date, and expectations. As Patricia prepared to leave, Marco walked her to the elevator. "There's something else I want to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you months ago. The night of the wedding, when I brought you, that wasn't just about William. It was also about me proving something to myself." "What do you mean?" Patricia asked. "I'd spent 3 years since Eleanor's death alone, isolated, throwing myself into business as a way to avoid dealing with my grief and guilt," Marco explained. "Bringing you to that wedding was my way of testing whether I could be around someone, connect with another human being, even in a superficial way. You helped me see that I wasn't as dead inside as I'd convinced myself I was." Patricia felt a lump in her throat. "I'm glad I could help, even inadvertently." "It wasn't inadvertent," Marco said. "You were honest with me that night, in the car, at the table, on the dance floor. You didn't pretend to be something you weren't, and that honesty was what I needed. So thank you, Patricia, for that night, and for giving this foundation a chance." Patricia started her new position in late April, throwing herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. The clients were challenging: a former veteran struggling with PTSD and alcoholism, a woman fleeing domestic violence with 3 children and nowhere to go, a man with a brilliant mind and bipolar disorder who couldn't hold a job for more than a few months. Each case required patience, creativity, and a willingness to see past the surface problems to the underlying issues. Dr. Chen became not just Patricia's supervisor, but her mentor, teaching her how to maintain professional boundaries while still showing genuine compassion, how to celebrate small victories when complete success seemed impossible, how to process the emotional weight of the work without burning out. "This job will break your heart regularly," Dr. Chen told Patricia during one of their weekly supervision meetings. "You'll have clients who succeed and clients who fail, and you won't always be able to predict which will be which. The key is to show up every day and do the best work you can, knowing that even small improvements in someone's life are worth the effort." 3 months into her new role, Patricia received an unexpected visitor. Catherine Monroe walked into the foundation's office, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than Patricia had ever seen her. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," Catherine said. "I wanted to see the foundation everyone's been talking about." Patricia gave her a tour of the facility, the renovated housing units with their simple but clean furnishings, the counseling rooms, the legal aid office, the communal kitchen where clients could prepare meals and socialize. Catherine asked thoughtful questions and listened intently to Patricia's descriptions of the programs and services. "This is impressive," Catherine said when they returned to Patricia's office. "Marco has done something genuinely good here." "He has," Patricia agreed. "It doesn't erase the other things he's done, but it's real, and it's helping people." Catherine sat down, her expression becoming more serious. "I have a proposal for you and for the foundation. My family's foundation, the Monroe Trust, has significant resources dedicated to social services. I've convinced the board to consider a major grant to support your work here. We're talking about $5 million over 5 years. Patricia's jaw dropped. That's incredible. That would allow us to expand our services, help so many more people." "There's a condition," Catherine said. "Well, not really a condition, more of a request. I want to be involved, not just as a donor, but as a volunteer. I want to work here, help clients, be part of what you're building." "Why?" Patricia asked, though she thought she understood. "Because I need purpose beyond being the woman who turned in her criminal husband," Catherine explained. "I've spent the last year defined by William's choices and my reaction to them. I want to define myself by what I choose to build, not just by what I chose to tear down. And this work, helping people who've been knocked down by life and helping them get back up, this feels meaningful in a way that nothing else has." Patricia extended her hand. "Welcome to the team." 1 year after the wedding that had changed so many lives, Marco Salvatore's foundation held its first annual fundraiser. The event was held at a boutique hotel in Brooklyn, chosen deliberately for its location in the community the foundation served, rather than in Manhattan's more glamorous neighborhoods. The guest list was an eclectic mix: former clients who'd successfully transitioned to stability, donors and supporters, social workers and advocates, and a handful of people from Marco's old life who were curious about his transformation. Patricia stood near the entrance, greeting guests and directing them to the reception area. She wore a new dress, not as expensive as the emerald gown from that fateful night, but elegant and professional. Her hair was styled simply, and her face showed the healthy glow of someone who slept in a real bed, ate regular meals, and had found purpose in her work. Catherine arrived with her parents, the Monroe family making a statement with their presence about their support for the foundation. She caught Patricia's eye and smiled, the kind of smile that communicated shared understanding and mutual respect. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said, hugging Catherine warmly. "I wouldn't miss it," Catherine replied. "Besides, I work here now. I have a vested interest in this event being successful." True to her word, Catherine had become a regular volunteer at the foundation, spending 2 days a week helping clients navigate housing applications and benefit systems. Her privileged background, which could have been a barrier, instead became an asset. She knew how to navigate bureaucratic systems, how to speak the language of officials and administrators, how to advocate effectively because she understood power structures from the inside. Marco gave a speech as the evening's program began, standing at a podium in front of the assembled guests. Patricia watched from the back of the room, noting how different he looked from the hard man she'd met in that alley a year ago. He still had the same commanding presence, but it was softened now, more approachable. "A year ago, I started this foundation because I was tired," Marco began. "Tired of the person I'd become. Tired of winning battles that felt increasingly hollow, tired of looking in the mirror and not recognizing the man looking back. I'd spent decades building power and influence, but I'd lost sight of why any of that mattered." He paused, looking around the room. "This foundation isn't about redemption. I'm not naive enough to think I can balance the scales for everything I've done. But it is about making different choices, about using whatever resources and influence I have to create something constructive rather than destructive, and it's about the people." Marco's eyes found Patricia in the crowd. "A year ago, I met a woman who was living on the streets through no fault of her own. I hired her for an evening to serve my own purposes, but she ended up teaching me something invaluable, that circumstances don't define character, that people are capable of remarkable resilience, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is offer someone a chance to rebuild, Patricia felt tears prick her eyes as Marco continued. That woman, Patricia Donovan, now coordinates our legal services program and has helped over 50 clients navigate complex legal issues that were barriers to their stability. She's living proof that with support and opportunity, people can transform their lives in remarkable ways. The room erupted in applause, and Patricia felt dozens of eyes turn to her. She nodded in acknowledgement, feeling simultaneously proud and uncomfortable with the attention. The evening continued with testimonials from clients. A man named James, who'd been homeless for 8 years and now worked as a building superintendent. A woman named Rosa, who'd fled domestic violence and now had her own apartment and a job as a pharmacy technician. A young man named Deshawn, who'd been in and out of shelters for most of his 20s and now was enrolled in community college studying social work. Each story was different, but they all shared common threads. The struggle to survive, the moment when someone offered help, the hard work of rebuilding, and the hope that came from having a stable foundation beneath your feet. As the formal program ended and guests mingled over dessert and coffee, Patricia found herself in conversation with one of the foundation's board members, a woman named Janet, who'd made her fortune in tech and now devoted her retirement to philanthropy. "Marco tells me you're considering going back to school for your law degree," Janet said. "I'm thinking about it," Patricia admitted. "I love what I do now, but I think I could help more people if I was actually a lawyer rather than just a paralegal." "The foundation would support that," Janet said. "We have an education assistance program for staff who want to pursue advanced degrees. Talk to Marco about it." Later that evening, as guests began to depart and the catering staff cleaned up, Patricia found Marco standing alone on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. "Thank you for what you said in there," Patricia said, joining him, "though I'm not sure I deserve that much credit." "You deserve every word," Marco replied. "You took a terrible situation and built something meaningful from it. That takes courage and determination that most people don't have." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights of the city twinkle in the distance. "I've been thinking about what you said to me a year ago," Patricia finally spoke, "about the difference between running away and starting over. You were right. They're not the same thing at all. Running away is about escape, but starting over is about reconstruction. It's about making deliberate choices to build something new rather than just fleeing from what was." "Have you figured out which one you're doing?" Marco asked. "Starting over," Patricia said with certainty. "I'm not running from my past anymore. I'm building something new while acknowledging where I've been. That's the only way forward that feels honest." Marco nodded. "Elena would have liked you. She always believed that people were more than their worst moments, that everyone deserved a chance at redemption if they were willing to do the work." "She sounds like she was a wise woman," Patricia said. "She was," Marco agreed. "And she was right about most things, including about me. She told me that I was burying my humanity under layers of pragmatism and self-protection, and that eventually I'd suffocate under all that armor. I didn't listen until it was too late." "It's not too late," Patricia said gently. "You're still here, still making choices, still capable of change. That's what this foundation represents, the idea that it's never too late to choose differently." Catherine joined them on the terrace, carrying 3 glasses of champagne. "I thought we could use a toast," she said, handing glasses to Patricia and Marco. "What are we toasting?" Marco asked. "To unlikely connections," Catherine proposed. "To painful truths that lead to necessary changes, to second chances and new beginnings, to choosing construction over destruction, even when it's harder." They clinked glasses, 3 people whose lives had intersected in unexpected and complicated ways, brought together by choices both good and bad, now working together to create something meaningful. "You know what's strange?" Catherine said after sipping her champagne. "A year ago, that wedding was supposed to be the best day of my life. Instead, it became one of the worst. But looking back now, it was also one of the most important. It forced me to see truths I needed to see, to make choices I needed to make, to become someone stronger than I was." "I think that's true for all of us," Patricia said. "That night was the beginning of something. Different things for each of us, but all significant." Marco raised his glass again. "Then here's to that night, to the wedding that ended one chapter and began several others. May we continue to write those chapters with more wisdom than we had before." As the 3 of them stood on that terrace, looking out at the city that had been the setting for their interconnected dramas, Patricia felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Her life wasn't perfect. She still had challenges to face, goals to achieve, demons to keep at bay. But she had a home, meaningful work, friends who understood her journey, and most importantly, she had hope. The foundation continued to grow over the following months. More clients found their way to stability. More donors joined the cause. More staff members were hired to expand services. Patricia enrolled in evening law school classes, determined to complete her degree while continuing her work at the foundation. Catherine became increasingly involved, eventually joining the board of directors and using her connections to open doors that had previously been closed. Marco remained a constant presence, but he'd changed in subtle ways. The hard edges had softened, and while he still maintained connections to his old life, he'd stepped back from active involvement in the family business. He focused instead on the foundation and on other legitimate ventures, slowly building a new legacy that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with purpose. 2 years after that fateful wedding, Patricia stood in her own apartment, a larger one-bedroom in a nicer neighborhood, earned through her own hard work and success. She looked at the emerald dress hanging in her closet, preserved as a reminder of where she'd been and how far she'd come. On her desk sat her acceptance letter to law school, her pay stubs from the foundation, and a photo from the fundraiser showing her, Marco, and Catherine laughing together. Her phone rang, Dr. Chen calling about a new client who needed help with a particularly complicated custody case. Patricia answered immediately, already mentally cataloguing the resources and strategies she'd need to deploy. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, grabbing her coat and bag. As she rode the subway to the foundation, Patricia thought about the unpredictable nature of life, about how a single moment could redirect everything, about how people could be both broken and capable of healing, both harmful and helpful, both lost and found. She thought about Marco's manipulation and his kindness, about Catherine's strength in destroying her own happiness for the sake of truth, about her own journey from the streets to stability. Life, she'd learned, was rarely about clear-cut heroes and villains. It was about flawed people making imperfect choices, sometimes hurting each other and sometimes helping each other, all while trying to navigate a world that was often cruel and occasionally kind. The best you could do was show up every day, make the most ethical choices available to you, help where you could, and keep moving forward, even when the path was unclear. Patricia emerged from the subway into the afternoon sunlight, walking the final blocks to the foundation with purpose in her stride. She had a client to help, work to do, a life to live. And for the first time in years, that life felt like it belonged to her, built not on luck or charity or someone else's manipulation, but on her own choices, her own work, her own determination to be more than her worst moments. The journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks and challenges, moments of doubt and difficulty. But Patricia was no longer the woman huddled under cardboard in a Brooklyn alley, no longer defined by what had happened to her. She was defined now by what she chose to do, by how she helped others, by the person she'd decided to become. As she walked through the foundation's doors, greeted by colleagues and clients who'd become something like family, Patricia smiled. This was home. Not the physical space, but the purpose, the community, the sense of building something meaningful. And that was worth more than any emerald dress or fancy wedding, worth more than the chaos and manipulation that had inadvertently led her here. In the end, the truth that had arrived at that wedding had shocked everyone, not just in its content, but in its consequences. It had destroyed one man's empire, ended a marriage, and set in motion a chain of events that transformed multiple lives. But from that destruction had come construction. From that pain had come purpose. From those ashes had risen something unexpectedly beautiful. And Patricia Donovan, who'd once had nothing, now had everything that truly mattered: dignity, purpose, stability, and hope. The rest was just details.